Melissa and Daniel Coleman were the perfect couple, until her secret affair with a washed-up adult film star, Troy Blaze, turned their quiet suburban life into a scene of betrayal, obsession, and cold-blooded murder. In the heart of a quiet California suburb, nestled among tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns, lived Melissa and Daniel Coleman, a couple admired by neighbors and envied by many. Their two-story colonial-style home stood as a symbol of success, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a white picket fence that seemed to tell the world that life inside was as flawless as the exterior. Daniel was a respected civil engineer, often working late on large commercial projects that earned him both prestige and a comfortable income. Melissa, on the other hand, had turned her passion for baking into a home business, selling designer cupcakes and pastries to local cafes and private clients. Their two young children were enrolled in a private school, and every Sunday morning, the family could be seen walking hand in hand to the local church. Everything about the Colemans suggested stability, trust, and happiness. But behind the closed doors of their picture-perfect home, Melissa was quietly battling a sense of loneliness that had been growing for years. As Daniel buried himself in work deadlines and late-night meetings, Melissa found herself alone for long hours in a house that had once felt full of life. The excitement of early marriage had faded, and while Daniel remained loyal and hard-working, his emotional distance had left a cold space in Melissa's heart. At first, she filled the silence with baking shows, social media, and parenting blogs. But eventually she stumbled upon adult content as a way to escape her boredom and restlessness. What started as casual curiosity quickly became a nightly habit, something she hid behind a locked bedroom door after the kids were asleep. Among the countless performers she saw, one face began to stand out: Troy Blaze. With rugged good looks, a cocky charm, and a bold presence, Troy seemed like the complete opposite of Daniel. While her husband came home exhausted and preoccupied, Troy represented danger, pleasure, and freedom, all the things Melissa felt she had lost. She began to follow him obsessively online, checking his updates, watching interviews, and learning personal details from fan forums. Her fascination turned emotional. She convinced herself that Troy wasn't just a performer, he was someone who could understand her, someone who would make her feel alive again. After weeks of silent obsession, Melissa created a fake social media profile and sent him a message, never expecting a reply. But to her surprise, Troy responded within hours. At first, their conversations were playful and harmless. They joked, flirted, and exchanged pictures, but soon, the chats turned more intimate. Troy, who had fallen out of favor in the industry and was looking for financial support, saw in Melissa an opportunity. She was older, attractive, clearly lonely, and willing to invest in their connection. Their online relationship began to escalate, crossing boundaries Melissa never imagined she'd blur. She found herself checking her phone constantly, ignoring housework, and daydreaming about a man she had never met in person. What started as an escape was rapidly evolving into an emotional affair, and it was only a matter of time before fantasy would collide with reality in the worst way imaginable. Melissa's secret online relationship with Troy Blaze grew stronger by the day. What began as innocent admiration had now transformed into a dangerous emotional dependency. She would wake up early, just to check his messages, and stay up late to catch a glimpse of him during video calls. Every message from Troy made her feel seen, valued, and desired, feelings she hadn't experienced in her marriage for years. Daniel, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his back, remained caught up in his demanding job, assuming that Melissa was simply busy with her baking orders and the children's schedules. The emotional distance between them widened, but Melissa no longer cared. Her thoughts were consumed by Troy. Troy, meanwhile, recognized the power he held. He knew Melissa was vulnerable and desperate for attention, and he used that to his advantage. Whenever she questioned the nature of their relationship or expressed doubt, he would shower her with compliments and promises. He hinted at a future where they could be together, painting a picture of a passionate, carefree life, far from the routine and responsibilities she was trapped in. Melissa, blinded by her longing and fueled by her loneliness, believed every word. She began sending him gifts, expensive watches, clothes, and even cash transfers disguised as loans. In return, Troy kept the fantasy alive with flirtation, affection, and manipulation. Eventually, messages and video calls weren't enough for Melissa. She wanted to see him in person, to make the connection real. She told Daniel that she had registered for a weekend baking workshop in Los Angeles, a believable excuse that raised no suspicion. She booked a luxury hotel suite and covered all of Troy's travel expenses. When they met in person for the first time, the illusion of fantasy finally collided with reality. But instead of hesitation or regret, Melissa felt exhilarated. Being with Troy made her feel young and powerful again. They spent the weekend wrapped in secrecy and indulgence, confirming everything Melissa had dreamed about. After that trip, their meetings became a regular routine. Melissa would invent business trips or family emergencies, anything that allowed her to escape and be with Troy. She began to withdraw from her community, ignore her children, and lose focus on her bakery business. Her entire life was now centered on Troy, but the more involved she became, the more demanding he grew. Troy, who had no real career stability, began asking for more money. He claimed he wanted to build a future together and needed help getting back on his feet. Melissa, terrified of losing him, gave in to every request. Then came a chilling shift in their conversations. Troy started planting subtle suggestions. What if Daniel was out of the picture? What if they didn't have to hide anymore? At first, Melissa resisted, but the idea took root. She began imagining a life without her husband, free to love openly, to be with someone who made her feel alive. What started as a fan fantasy had turned into a real-life obsession, and Melissa was now standing at the edge of a line that, once crossed, would change everything forever. As the months passed, Daniel began to notice the subtle, unsettling changes in his wife. Melissa, once attentive and warm, had grown distant and irritable. She avoided eye contact, spent long hours on her phone, and seemed to lose interest in their usual family routines. At first, Daniel blamed himself. His job was demanding, and he often came home late, exhausted and distracted. He thought Melissa was just tired or overwhelmed from running her baking business and managing the children. He tried to reconnect by planning a weekend getaway and offering to help more at home, but she brushed off every gesture with vague excuses. The warmth in their marriage had cooled into something quiet and unfamiliar. Daniel's suspicions grew stronger when he found a receipt for a luxury hotel stay in Los Angeles, tucked inside a cookbook. Melissa had told him she was staying at a friend's during that trip for a baking convention. But the receipt told a different story. He didn't confront her immediately. Instead, he began watching her more closely. He noticed that she would take phone calls in the bathroom, with the water running, delete her call logs, and quickly switch screens whenever he walked into a room. The trust they once shared had silently eroded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. One night, while cleaning under the bed, Daniel discovered a DVD in an unmarked case. Curious, he slipped it into the player. What he saw shocked him to the core. It was an adult film starring Troy Blaze. Daniel didn't know his name, but the man's face and persona were unforgettable. He stared at the screen in disbelief, trying to understand why his wife would have something like this hidden. For a brief moment, he thought it might be a private curiosity, something harmless. But in his gut he knew there was more. Unable to shake the feeling, Daniel started going through Melissa's laptop when she was out. Her browsing history had been wiped clean, but he found a hidden folder of screenshots and saved chats that she had forgotten to delete. The messages were explicit, emotional, and far beyond what could be considered casual flirtation. His heart sank as he read the exchanges. Melissa had fallen in love with this man. The betrayal was worse than he imagined. Not only was she unfaithful, but she was deeply entangled in a relationship with someone who appeared to be exploiting her vulnerability. Daniel wanted to confront her, but he didn't know how. Instead, he began collecting evidence. He took photos of the receipts, copied the messages, and even followed her once during one of her supposed business trips. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears. Melissa was meeting this man regularly, lying without remorse, and funneling large sums of money to him. The woman he married was now a stranger, obsessed, deceitful, and emotionally gone. And while Daniel was quietly planning how to handle the crumbling pieces of their marriage, Melissa and her secret lover were already making plans of their own. Plans that would soon lead to a horrifying end. It was a Friday evening. The sky darkened with heavy clouds as rain began to fall steadily over the quiet neighborhood. Daniel had come home early for the first time in weeks, hoping to talk to Melissa and make one last attempt to fix what had shattered between them. But Melissa wasn't home. She had left earlier that day, claiming she needed to deliver a custom cake to a client an hour away. Daniel didn't question it out loud, but in his mind he was already convinced the story was a lie. He sat in the kitchen, watching the clock, unaware that it would be the last time he would ever wait for her. Later that night, a neighbor reported hearing screams coming from the Coleman's garage. By the time police arrived, the scene was a nightmare. Daniel's lifeless body was found lying in a pool of blood beside his car. He had been stabbed 17 times, his face bruised, and his hands covered in defensive wounds. The garage door was unlocked, the lights still on, and there was no sign of forced entry. A shattered flower pot lay near the body, suggesting a brief struggle, but the killer had moved fast and with rage. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife from Melissa's own set, was left behind, wiped clean but unmistakable in its origin. Melissa arrived at the scene about an hour later, crying hysterically and barely able to speak. She told officers she had just returned from a delivery and found police cars outside her home. Her performance was convincing, too convincing. She clung to the officers, asked to see Daniel, and collapsed when told he was gone. But detectives had handled enough cases to know when something didn't feel right. Despite her tears, Melissa's timeline was shaky. She couldn't clearly explain her whereabouts or provide proof of the cake delivery. Her phone, when checked, had been reset just hours before. Her alibi, already weak, began to crumble. The initial theory was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing in the house was missing. No doors or windows had been broken, and Daniel's wallet and phone were still in his pockets. It looked staged, like someone wanted it to seem random but didn't know how to cover the details. Surveillance cameras from nearby homes showed no unknown individuals entering or leaving the property. But what investigators did find were Melissa's bank records. In the week before the murder, she had transferred $15,000 to an unlisted personal account. A deeper search linked that account to Troy Blaze, whose real name was Thomas Becker, a man with a criminal record and a long trail of financial desperation. A warrant was issued for Troy's arrest, and phone records showed dozens of deleted messages between him and Melissa just days before the murder. When police reviewed Melissa's internet history using recovery software, they uncovered searches like how to erase messages permanently, staged robbery tips, and poison versus knife. The pieces were falling into place. What seemed like a tragic home invasion was quickly becoming a case of cold-blooded, premeditated murder, and Melissa's role in it was far more active than anyone initially imagined. Troy Blaze, whose real name was Thomas Becker, was located just 3 days after the murder in a seedy motel outside of Reno, Nevada. He was alone, agitated, and in possession of 2 fake passports, a large stash of cash, and a prepaid cell phone. When officers burst into the room, he didn't resist. He seemed exhausted, as if he had expected this moment to come. During the interrogation, he at first denied involvement in Daniel's murder, claiming he was on his way to Canada for a job. But when faced with the overwhelming evidence, surveillance footage, financial transfers, and text messages, his story cracked. Thomas eventually confessed, but not without dragging Melissa down with him. He claimed the murder was her idea from the beginning. According to him, Melissa had promised a new life together, free from lies and limitations, if he helped eliminate her husband. She was the one who supplied the money, provided the knife, and even detailed Daniel's schedule. Thomas insisted he only did it out of love, believing they would start over as soon as Daniel was gone. But investigators knew better. They had seen this pattern before: mutual manipulation masked as love, 2 unstable people feeding off each other's fantasies until the line between right and wrong vanished. Melissa was arrested at her home just hours after Troy's confession. Her shocked neighbors watched in silence as she was led away in handcuffs, her face pale and expressionless. During questioning, she broke down quickly. At first, she tried to paint herself as a victim, claiming Troy had threatened her, and that she never truly intended for Daniel to be harmed. But her digital footprint told a different story. The searches she had made, the deleted texts she thought were gone, and the money she had wired all pointed to someone fully invested in the plan. There was no sign of coercion, only complicity. In court, the trial became a media frenzy. The details were too sensational to ignore. A suburban wife, a fading adult film star, a brutal murder, and a motive rooted in lust, greed, and fantasy. The prosecution presented Melissa and Thomas as co-conspirators, equally responsible for the calculated killing. Both had plotted, both had participated in the cover-up, and both had acted out of selfish desire. Melissa's defense team attempted to argue emotional manipulation and diminished capacity, but it was not enough. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days before returning with a guilty verdict. Melissa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thomas Becker, due to the nature of the crime and his direct role in the killing, received the death penalty. Their twisted relationship, built on lies and indulgence, had ended in betrayal and destruction. The Coleman children were placed in the care of Daniel's sister, left to grow up without either parent. The once quiet neighborhood struggled to make sense of what had happened in the house next door. A story that began with secret texts and stolen moments had ended in blood, handcuffs, and 2 ruined lives.